Hi there, and welcome to another installment of the Oral History Project. My name's Jason Cox. I'm here on behalf of the Keizer Points of Interest Committee. And as I mentioned, this is part of the Oral History Project where we're getting Keizerites and former Keizerites to tell us their stories of life back then. This is Sid Francisco, who was born in Salem on the hospital on Center Street in 1925. And grew up on Ridge Drive, and actually, your mom named Ridge Drive, right?
That's right.
So what was the name of it before?
It was RFD number 2,
So
Salem, Oregon.
So RFD stands for?
Rural Free Delivery.
So what made, as you recall, what made her decide to give it a proper name?
Well, at that time, they were naming the streets in Keizer, and she came up with that, and then we got up a petition and went, and I took them down the street to get the signatures of everyone affected by it, and so we submitted it to the county, and they named it Ridge Drive then.
So can you give us an idea, so you got the Little League fields there and the train line that still kind of comes by there. Can you describe what the area looked like when you were growing up?
All right. You look right across that field in front of my house, and you'd see the old Shamawa School. And between the Shamawa School and a little shed by the Oregon Electric track was a boardwalk. And in 1933, the Oregon Electric went out of business, and of course they didn't need the walk anymore, so it finally wore out and disappeared. And also my dad got permission from the railroad company to tear down the shed, so we got the lumber out of that shed.
And do you remember what he used it for?
Well, yes, we used it to use around the house there, and it had all kinds of carvings, you know, that the Indians had put in the boards and everything. And we used it for another shed there in the backyard.
So, you mentioned what did your father do for a living?
He worked for Southern Pacific, and he after World War I he came home and got a job at Shamawa Indian School as their railroad agent, and he met my mother. My mother came out from Virginia to teach school. Mm-hmm. And he was the first man she met when she got off the train. So anyway, that's what he did, and there's a lot of old timers that said the same thing. He was the first man they met when they got off the train because he was the agent.
So so he was an agent for the school then?
No.
Okay, for the rail.
Southern Pacific.
I see.
Yeah.
So how did that, what was the impact of you mentioned that he was the first person that they met a lot of times when folks got off the train. How did that help you and your family make friends in that area?
Oh, sure. Yeah. You bet.
So, you went to to the Keizer School.
Keizer School, right.
What do you remember about that?
Well, I managed to get through it. And we used to have a gravel road. This is all gravel road back in those days. And, well, we walked to school until I got a bicycle. And so I went to the first eight grades in Keizer School. And in those days, people didn't move around much once they get settled, you know. So we went to school with practically the same kids that started off in the first grade ended up in the 8th grade.
So did you find that early impressions probably lasted then?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
So what was your what memories of childhood? What did you do during the summer? What's your what do you remember about what you guys did for fun?
Fun.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we used to go swimming in Claggett Creek down here, and also went out to Blake's Lake, they called it,
Mm-hmm.
and then I went over to Shamawa, and we played with the kids over there, and I finally got a bicycle, and I could roam the whole Keizer area then, and once in a while, Shamawa would have a movie on Saturday nights, and those were big things in those days.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
How did you find living next to the school helped you understand Native American people?
Well, I, they were just like anybody else,
Mm-hmm.
you know. Just we just they had a good ball team, and they had a very nice basketball team, and they won a lot of games.
So I have a photo here in my, and I don't know if they'll be able to see it or not, but we'll put a slide up, and it's of Charles McNary, who was a senator from Keizer, and ran for vice president in 1940 on Wendell Willkie's ticket, and so in the picture here, that's you
Yes,
on the far right there. Now, what were you doing there? Were you in the band?
I was in the band. Yes, I had a trumpet that I played
I see.
in the band there. Yes,
Were you good at it?
average, I guess. Wasn't good at anything, but I played the trumpet.
So, what do you remember about this day here?
Well, I remember it was a nice day, and we marched in there, down there at McNary's, down there, called it Fur Cone at the time, and we had that banner, and we just marched down there and played, and they presented those roses to him, and that's about all I remember.
What was the weather like that day?
It was very nice, very good.
What at the time did it occur to you that there was kind of a big deal when someone from your town's running for vice president of the United States? Did it strike you then that it was kind of I guess a big deal?
Well, not at that age.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't paying that much attention to about anything.
So did you know Charles McNary before that?
Yes.
So tell me about some of the interactions you had with him.
Well, some of us kids were down there fishing in his pond that he had all raked out there. He just came out and explained to us that it was his fish and his pond, and he was very nice about it. So we left without any fish.
So what was it? So you were very small when the train line ran by your house.
Yes.
What was that like having, because there was a train stop there, I presume, and
That's
people
right.
getting on and off.
Yeah.
And
It was very convenient for us because we just get on that train and it'd take us right downtown, and the station was right in front of the Elsinore Theater, but it was across the street from the Elsinore Theater, and we could use that train very, very nice.
hmm
And then they went out of business, and we had to travel by our own car then.
So tell me how you were you drafted into what branch were you in?
Now, I was in the Navy, and I was not drafted because I wanted to get in the Navy and I went in at 17
hmm
and got out when I was 21 in World War II. Then I joined the reserve, and I was the second one called out of Salem, and I went to Tokyo for 14 months. And that was my naval career, but I was in the South Pacific on an LST and made 5 invasions.
What does LST stand for?
Landing ship tank.
Where were some of the what were some of the invasions you were involved in?
Okay, Kwajalein, Eniwetok, Saipan, Tinian, Peleliu, and Lingayen Gulf in the Philippines.
Did you find that, so what did you do, that was after the war then, that you were stationed in Tokyo? Well, yeah, that makes
It's
sense.
the Korean War.
So you went to Tokyo,
Yes.
and what did you do there?
Well, I joined all the clubs I could join and had a real good time. They had the best entertainment in Japan. We could rent a sponsored, a government-sponsored hotel for 50 cents a day with meals, and they were all over Japan there, the best hotels. So I had a real luxurious time in Tokyo.
That had to be quite the contrast to kind of coming up through the Depression during your formative years.
Oh, sure.
So how was your family affected by the Depression?
Well, fortunately, my dad had a job with Southern Pacific. And my friends, everybody at Shamawa Indian School had a job. And there's fruit trees and nut trees and all kinds of fruit all over this area. And so we didn't starve.
Mm-hmm.
And also, when people went fishing, they came back with a full load. And so we ate pretty good. But we didn't have any money for candy bars and stuff like that.
That's tragic.
Yeah, it was bad.
So what was that like, kind of getting to sort of live it up when you were in Tokyo for the first time? That had to be something else.
Besides living it up?
What was that? How did that feel? What was that like to find, kind of taste the sweeter side in some ways?
Well, it was a nice experience. We had a lot of fun there.
So back in Keizer, when you were growing up, what were the businesses that your family went to often, or just?
In Keizer?
Uh-huh.
Well, there's only one store here on the corner of Shamawa Road and North River Road.
Mm-hmm.
There's just one store right across the street. And also there was a store at Shamawa. And we went to that store. But we did most of our shopping in town for, food and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And back in those days, you'd go in and buy a 100-pound sack of sugar or a big sack of flour. Because back in those days, the mothers were all at home and they did all the cooking and baking and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that where you lived, you wouldn't have been particularly impacted by the flooding that
No.
hit this area.
No, there wasn't any flooding up on Ridge Drive.
How did that affect, did it affect your friends at all?
Well, sure. Right down here at Claggett Creek, it was flooded over quite often. Plus, down there on Windsor, it was a lot of people flooded out down there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And Mangren Gardens up here was flooded, too. And then they put the dam in, Detroit Dam, and that kind of took care of the flooding.
So when you came back from Tokyo, how did that affect, grew up in a little town in Oregon, you go abroad, you've been abroad, which most men of your generation did.
Yeah.
And then you go to Tokyo, one of the biggest cities in the world.
Yeah.
And you come back here. How'd you decide your next move after that?
Well, for one thing, I had to go back to work. And I worked for the highway department for 34 years and retired.
You were a mechanic, right?
Yes.
Did you learn those skills in the Navy?
Part of it, yeah. I was in the engine room on this landing ship tank.
I see. Well, what were, you know, between even when you were born and were a small child and came back after your time in Tokyo, how had you seen the area start to grow? What was new? What was paved?
Well, yeah, I remember when they paved Shamawa Road here and Cherry Avenue, and up until then we just had gravel roads. And and then on the north side of Shamawa Road, there was houses, but on this south side of Shamawa Road, it was prune trees. But then eventually, they started putting houses on this side, which would be north of Shamawa Road. And then they built a grocery store on the corner down there on Shamawa Road and North River Road. Yeah.
So that had to change life just to have a grocery store that close.
Oh, sure.
So,
We only had one stop sign between my house and Salem, and that was at North River Road.
hmm
And also there was one up on the 99E we had to stop. Yeah.
So who were some of the families that your family was friends with, or that you played with as when you were a boy or young, or that that you spent time with as a young man?
Well, there's a fellow that's still my friend, Fred Ratesberg, and then there's the Smith family. There's Betty Jean and Billy Pierce lived right across the street here, and Jimmy Muckridge, Milton Savage,
hmm
and Raymond Weathers, and Jeanette Stratton. There were, and David Melson.
So how did life? You said you worked for the highway department pretty much all the way through to your retirement. So how did that change throughout? What were some of the? Let me ask you this: what were some of the road projects in this area that you worked on?
Well, I didn't work on
You worked on the vehicles that worked on the
vehicles
roads.
at the highway shops.
So how did that job evolve throughout your time at the department?
Well, it was every year we had a new vehicle to work on, a new design and everything.
hmm
And I put 34 years in doing that.
So you mentioned you were when you talk about the hospital on Center Street. That's
Yes.
the big state hospital.
Not the state.
I was gonna say,
No, this is the regular
is that still
Salem General. It's still there. Yeah,
I see. And your sister lives in Keizer, right?
right.
All right. Well, I think we've about got our time up for this installment. I want to thank Syd for coming down and chatting with us. You can see this on Channel 23 or online at KeiserTV.com. Again, I'm Jason Cox. Thanks again to Syd. Have a wonderful day.
Oh, thank you.